Picture this. You're diving off the coast of Hawaii, minding your own business, checking out some coral, when a wild dolphin swims straight at you. Not swimming away like dolphins usually do when they spot a human paddling around in their territory. This one comes closer and closer, until it's basically nose to nose with you, holding perfectly still, like it's waiting for something. Turns out it was waiting for something. Wrapped around its fin was a thick tangle of fishing line, cutting into its skin. And this dolphin had apparently decided that of all the creatures in the entire ocean, a random human with a dive knife was its best shot at getting free. And it worked. The diver carefully cut the line away. The dolphin swam a slow, almost thankful circle around the boat, and then vanished back into the blue like nothing happened. Now here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. This isn't some rare, one-in-a-million fluke. Stories like this happen constantly, all over the world, with completely different species that have zero reason to trust us. Whales caught in nets, elephants with wounds, birds with broken wings. Even sharks, of all things, have been reported to approach divers seemingly for help. Wild animals, creatures that spend their entire lives avoiding humans because, let's be honest, we've given them plenty of reasons to be terrified of us, sometimes turn around and do the exact opposite. They seek us out. So what is actually going on here? Are animals smarter than we give them credit for? Do they understand cause and effect well enough to know that humans are the ones who can help? Or is something else happening, something a little less flattering to our egos, where we're just the only option left in a desperate situation? Stick around because the answer is stranger, more emotional, and honestly more hopeful than you'd expect. And by the end of this, you're going to look at every stray cat that walks up to you a little differently. Let's start with the ocean, because honestly, the ocean produces the most jaw-dropping cases of this behavior. Whales are a great place to begin. In 2005, off the coast of California, a fisherman spotted a female humpback whale in serious trouble. She was tangled in a web of crab trap lines, so badly wrapped up that the ropes were cutting into her flesh, digging into her mouth, wrapped around her tail, pulling her fins in unnatural directions. She was basically anchored in place, unable to swim properly, unable to dive, slowly drowning under her own weight. A rescue team arrived, and this is where it gets almost unbelievable. Freeing a fully grown humpback whale, an animal that can weigh as much as 40 tons, is not exactly a walk in the park. One tail slap from a panicked, injured whale could kill a diver instantly, so you'd expect this whale to thrash around in fear as strangers approached her with knives. Instead, witnesses said she stayed remarkably calm. Divers spent about an hour cutting away rope after rope, working directly against her body, and she barely moved. Then, once she was finally free, instead of bolting for the open ocean like you'd expect from a terrified wild animal that just spent hours restrained by another species, she did something that gave every rescuer on that boat goosebumps. She swam around each diver, one at a time, nudging them gently, almost like she was thanking them individually. One of the divers later described it as the most emotional experience of his life, saying it felt like she knew exactly what had just happened to her. Skeptics will tell you that's projection, that we're reading human emotion into animal behavior because we want it to be true. And sure, science demands we be careful about that. But here's the thing, this pattern doesn't just show up once. It shows up over and over with different whales, different oceans, different decades. Jump over to the coast of Baja California in Mexico, where gray whales do something researchers still can't fully explain. These whales migrate thousands of miles every year to give birth in a specific lagoon. For most of the 20th century, that lagoon was actually the site of a mass whale hunt, so brutal it earned the nickname Whalers Lagoon. You would think, given that history, gray whales would want absolutely nothing to do with humans in small boats ever again. Instead, the opposite happened. Starting in the 1970s, gray whale mothers began approaching tourist boats in that exact lagoon, pushing their calves up toward the surface, close enough for people to reach out and touch them. These are called friendly whales, and it's become one of the strangest tourism phenomena on the planet. Mothers who have every biological reason to fear boats are instead offering up their babies for a friendly nuzzle. Nobody trained them to do this, nobody taught them boats were safe. They just decided on their own, generation after generation, that this particular relationship with humans had changed. Now let's talk dolphins again, because they might be the most consistent example of this whole phenomenon. Dolphins have been recorded approaching swimmers and divers not just to have fishing line removed, but sometimes to get help with something even more surprising: illness. There are documented cases of dolphins swimming up to boats and appearing to guide humans toward another dolphin in distress, staying close, circling, almost like they're saying, "Follow me." In several cases, rescuers found sick or injured dolphins exactly where the healthy dolphin had been leading them. There's also the well-known case of dolphins protecting swimmers from sharks, which sounds like something out of a movie, but has happened enough times to be taken seriously by marine biologists. In one widely reported incident off the coast of New Zealand, a group of dolphins formed a tight circle around a group of swimmers and wouldn't let them leave, seemingly herding them together. Moments later, the swimmers realized a great white shark had been circling nearby the entire time. The dolphins weren't playing, they were running interference. So here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Why dolphins? Why do they, of all wild animals, seem to show up again and again in stories of helping humans and asking humans for help in return? The leading theory has to do with dolphin brains, specifically how eerily similar their social intelligence is to ours. Dolphins live in complex social groups. They recognize individual dolphins by unique signature whistles that function almost like names. They show evidence of self-awareness, and they've even been observed grieving their dead. An animal with that level of social cognition is far more likely to generalize the concept of help across species lines. Basically, if a dolphin already understands the idea of "my podmate is stuck, I should stay near it and signal for support," it's not that big a leap for a dolphin to look at a human diver and think, maybe this creature can help too. It's less about dolphins being magically loyal to humans and more about dolphins having brains sophisticated enough to problem solve their way into asking for help from whoever happens to be nearby and capable. Now, let's come up out of the water and head onto land, because this same behavior shows up in some genuinely unexpected places. Elephants are a big one, pun slightly intended. Elephants have one of the most advanced memory systems in the animal kingdom, and their social bonds run incredibly deep. There are stories from wildlife reserves in Africa of injured elephants approaching rangers, standing patiently while people examine wounds, snares, or infections, sometimes even lying down to allow access to an injury that would otherwise be impossible to treat on a standing multi-ton animal. One particularly well-known case involves an elephant with a snare wrapped tightly around its leg, cutting deeper each day as the animal grew. Rangers tracked the elephant for hours, and when they finally approached with a vet team, the elephant, despite being a wild animal with every reason to run from armed humans and vehicles, allowed the team to sedate it and remove the snare. When it woke up, it didn't charge off in a blind panic. Some rangers reported the elephant lingered nearby for a while, almost as if it wanted to make sure everyone understood the danger had passed. Elephants have also been observed doing something that researchers call targeted helping, where they specifically identify an individual in distress, whether human or animal, and respond to that individual's specific need rather than just reacting to general chaos. There's footage of elephants gently using their trunks to help other elephants who are stuck, calves who have fallen, and yes, occasionally humans who have gotten themselves into dangerous situations near elephant herds. It's not guaranteed protection. Elephants are still wild animals and can absolutely be dangerous. But the capacity for this kind of behavior tells you something important about how they process the world. Now, for a story that tends to blow people's minds the first time they hear it. In 2010 in South Africa, there's a widely circulated account of a herd of wild elephants that traveled to a specific house, the home of a conservationist who had passed away, and stood outside quietly for 2 days, as if paying respects. Whether you interpret that as grief, memory, or simple coincidence is up for debate, but it fits a pattern that shows up constantly with elephants, a level of emotional and social awareness that makes reaching out to humans, or acknowledging humans, feel less like instinct and more like an actual decision. Let's shift gears to something a little less majestic and a little more hilarious, because not every animal that asks humans for help does it with quiet dignity. Take moose. Moose are enormous, moody, unpredictable animals that most wildlife experts will tell you to stay far away from. And yet there are multiple documented cases of moose in places like Alaska and Canada wandering directly into towns, right up to people's front porches, seemingly looking for help. One case that made the rounds online involved a moose that showed up at a rural home with a plastic jack-o'-lantern bucket stuck firmly on its snout. The moose had apparently gotten curious, stuck its face in the bucket looking for leftover candy or scraps, and then couldn't get it back off. Instead of thrashing around in the woods until it starved, it wandered toward the nearest house and just stood there, snorting, bumping gently into the door until the homeowner came out to investigate. After a fairly comedic standoff involving the moose refusing to hold still and the homeowner trying not to get trampled, the bucket came off and the moose wandered away like nothing had happened. No thank you card. No dramatic nuzzle. Just freedom achieved, see you never. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. There's something almost funny about the fact that a 1,000-pound wild animal, capable of seriously injuring a grizzly bear in a fight, can be brought down to complete helplessness by something as ridiculous as a plastic bucket. But it also reinforces a key part of why this whole phenomenon exists in the first place. When wild animals get stuck in a situation their instincts never prepared them for, something man-made, something mechanical, something involving trash, snares, or fishing gear, their normal survival tools stop working. Running doesn't help. Fighting doesn't help. And in that moment of total helplessness, some animals seem to recognize on some level that the very species who created the problem might also be the one capable of solving it. Birds do this too, and honestly, bird stories might be some of the most touching in this entire category, mostly because birds are so fragile and so obviously desperate when they show up needing help. There are countless accounts of wild birds, owls especially, showing up injured near human homes, sometimes literally tapping on windows with their beaks. Owls with damaged wings have been found sitting calmly on porches, allowing themselves to be picked up and placed into boxes by strangers, something a healthy wild owl would absolutely never allow. There's a particularly striking case involving a wild crow, a species famous for being suspiciously intelligent, showing up at a woman's back door every single day for weeks, sometimes bringing small trinkets like bottle caps or shiny buttons. It turned out the woman had once helped the crow's injured sibling, and crows are known for having long memories and recognizing individual human faces. Researchers have actually tested this with masks, having people wear different masks while either feeding or bothering crows, and the crows remembered which mask belonged to a friendly human and which belonged to a threat, sometimes for years afterward. So when a crow shows up at your door bearing gifts, it's not random. It's a bird with a memory better than most people's, deciding you're one of the safe ones. Now here's where the story gets genuinely fascinating, because we need to actually dig into the science of why this happens instead of just collecting cute anecdotes. Researchers who study animal cognition point to a few overlapping explanations, and honestly, most scientists agree it's a combination of all of them working together rather than one single tidy answer. The first big piece of the puzzle is desperation and the absence of alternatives. When a wild animal is injured, tangled, trapped, or sick, it experiences something researchers call a threshold shift in risk tolerance. Basically, an animal that would normally treat humans as a major threat starts recalculating the odds. If staying away from humans means certain death, but approaching humans carries a smaller chance of danger and a real chance of relief, the math flips. The fear of humans doesn't disappear, but it gets outweighed by the fear of dying slowly from an untreated wound or fishing line cutting deeper by the hour. This explains a lot of the more dramatic cases: the whales tangled in nets, the elephants with snares, the birds with broken wings. These are animals in genuine crisis, and crisis changes behavior across pretty much every species on Earth, including us. Think about how differently people behave during an emergency versus a calm afternoon. Desperation makes creatures do things they'd never normally consider. The second explanation involves something a little more heartwarming: learned trust through prior positive experience. This one applies heavily to species with strong memories and social intelligence like elephants, dolphins, and corvids such as crows and ravens. If an animal, or its family group, has had a previous encounter where a human helped rather than harmed, that memory sticks. And in social species, this information doesn't necessarily stay locked inside one individual's brain. Animals that live in groups often learn behaviors by observing each other, meaning a single positive interaction with a human can ripple outward and shape how an entire group responds to people down the line. This is part of why places like that gray whale lagoon in Mexico transformed from a site of slaughter into a site of friendly, trusting interactions. Once enough positive encounters accumulated, generation after generation, the collective behavior of the population shifted. It's not that every individual whale personally remembers being safe with tourist boats. It's that the culture, if you can even call it that, of the population changed. The third explanation is a little more philosophical, and it has to do with what scientists call interspecies empathy recognition. Essentially, the ability of an animal to recognize distress or intention in a completely different species. This is rarer and harder to prove, but there's growing evidence that some highly social, highly intelligent animals can pick up on human body language, tone of voice, and behavior patterns well enough to judge whether a specific human is a threat or an ally in the moment, regardless of past history with humans in general. Dogs are the most obvious example of this in domesticated animals. They're basically world champions at reading human emotion. But wild animals with strong social cognition, elephants, dolphins, and certain primates, show flashes of the same skill. A calm, slow-moving human speaking in a soft tone sends completely different signals than a human running, yelling, or making sudden threatening movements. Animals capable of parsing that difference in real time are far more likely to approach a calm rescuer for help than a random stranger acting erratically. Now, here's a twist that a lot of people don't expect, and it involves something researchers call the audience effect, which sounds fancy but is actually pretty simple. Some studies suggest certain animals behave differently when they know they're being watched by humans, adjusting their vocalizations or body language specifically to draw attention. Domestic dogs are famous for this. They'll look back and forth between a stuck object and their owner's face repeatedly, almost narrating the problem. But there's growing evidence this shows up in wild animals too, especially in situations involving injury. There's a documented case of a wild seal pup that had gotten separated from its mother and was being circled by aggressive gulls looking for an easy meal. Instead of just curling up and hoping for the best, the pup began vocalizing directly toward a group of beachgoers, repeatedly turning its head between the gulls and the humans, almost as if signaling, "Hey, a little help here." The humans intervened, chased off the gulls, and the pup was later reunited with its mother. Was that pure survival instinct, or something closer to an actual request for help directed, specifically at an audience capable of providing it? Researchers still argue about where that line sits, but the behavior itself is undeniably real. At this point, you might be wondering whether humans have always had this kind of relationship with wild animals, or if this is a relatively recent thing showing up now that we film everything on our phones and post it online. And that's actually a fantastic question, because historically humans and wild animals have a much older, much more complicated relationship than most people realize. Long before recorded history, there's strong archaeological evidence that early humans had cooperative relationships with wild wolves, long before actual domestication turned them into dogs. The leading theory suggests that wolves who were less fearful of human camps and more willing to hang around scavenging scraps gradually formed a mutually beneficial relationship with early humans, who in turn may have benefited from the wolves' hunting skills and their alarm calls, warning of approaching predators or rival tribes. Over thousands of years, that relationship transformed the wolf into the domestic dog, arguably the single most successful interspecies partnership in the history of life on Earth. But here's the interesting part. Some researchers argue that same underlying instinct, the ability to recognize a beneficial relationship with humans and lean into it rather than avoid it, might still exist as a kind of evolutionary residue in other species. It's not that every wild animal is trying to domesticate itself, but the biological and behavioral machinery that allowed some early canines to say, "You know what, humans aren't so bad," might be present in a more limited form across a wider range of species than we previously assumed, activated specifically in moments of crisis or repeated positive contact. There's also a fascinating and much more direct historical example involving a completely different species, the honey-guide bird found in parts of Africa. For generations, certain human communities have worked with wild honey-guide birds in an active, intentional partnership. The bird, driven by an appetite for beeswax it can't get to on its own, leads humans directly to wild beehives using specific calls and flight patterns. The humans then break open the hive for honey and, in exchange, leave behind chunks of wax for the bird to eat. This isn't some rare fluke sighting, it's a documented, repeatable, mutually understood relationship that has been passed down through generations of both humans and birds. Arguably one of the clearest examples on the planet of a wild animal, recognizing humans as active partners rather than threats. So when you connect the dots, ancient cooperative behavior with wolves, active partnerships with honey-guide birds, dolphins recognizing individual humans across encounters, elephants remembering rescuers years later, crows holding grudges and gratitude for astonishing lengths of time, you start to realize this whole idea of animals seeking human help isn't some brand new internet-era phenomenon. It's an old, deep pattern in nature that we're just now capable of documenting on video and sharing with the entire world in a matter of seconds. Of course, it's worth being balanced here because it would be irresponsible to make it sound like every wild animal secretly wants to be your friend. The vast majority of wild animal encounters still follow the expected pattern. Animals see humans. Animals get the heck out of there because for most of history, and honestly for good reason, humans have represented danger far more often than help. Poaching, habitat destruction, hunting, and human expansion into wild spaces have created plenty of legitimate reasons for animals to fear us. These stories of animals approaching humans for help are meaningful precisely because they're exceptions, rare cracks in an otherwise well-earned wall of caution. And there's an important safety note buried in all of this too. Just because some wild animals occasionally seek out help doesn't mean it's ever a good idea to approach an injured wild animal yourself. A whale in distress, an elephant with a snare, a moose with a bucket on its head, these situations are genuinely dangerous, and professional rescuers exist for a reason. Even an animal that appears calm and cooperative can panic instantly if it feels cornered, and a panicked wild animal, especially a large one, can cause serious injury without any malicious intent whatsoever. If you ever come across a wild animal that seems to be asking for help, the safest and most effective thing you can do is contact local wildlife authorities rather than attempting a rescue yourself. But putting the safety disclaimers aside for a second, there's something genuinely moving about the core idea here. In a world that constantly reminds us how much damage humans have done to wild spaces and wild creatures, these stories offer a strange kind of hope. They suggest that some animals, when pushed to their absolute limit, are capable of making a calculated decision to trust us anyway. Not because they're naive, but because somewhere in their evolutionary or social wiring, there's room for the possibility that humans, despite everything, might actually help. A tangled whale choosing to stay still while strangers cut away the ropes, killing it. An elephant lying down and allowing itself to be sedated by the same species responsible for the snare in the first place. A crow remembering a single kind act years later and repaying it with gifts. A seal pup turning its head towards strangers on a beach because somewhere inside its instincts, it recognized an opportunity worth taking. These moments matter because they represent a kind of quiet optimism from creatures that owe us absolutely nothing. Maybe that's the real answer to the question of why wild animals sometimes ask humans for help. It's not one single tidy reason, it's desperation mixed with memory, mixed with social intelligence, mixed with an ancient evolutionary thread connecting us all the way back to those first cautious wolves circling human campfires. Every species involved in these stories is essentially making the same bet, that despite everything, despite the danger, despite the history, this particular human, right here, right now, might be one of the good ones. And honestly, every single time one of these animals turns out to be right, it feels like a small reminder that maybe, just maybe, we can be worth trusting after all.